In this video we've got a new train, we've got new baseboards, and we've even got a lovely new track camera. Welcome to the summer update. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. Now, since the spring update, a few things have changed besides the 6 videos that hopefully we've enjoyed together. So what I thought I'd do first is show you around the existing layout and track work to bring you up to date. Now, this is the eastern side of my railway room, and as you can see, there's the 5-tier helix, and zooming in a little bit as we go to the other end, you can see where I've started the incline up to the branch line station, which will actually come across the top of the helix. And there you can see a couple of Hymex and an 08 parked on the approach. You can also see a 125 there, and that's going out towards the viaduct at the far end. Changing the viewing angle now, so there you can see the electrics as it's starting to take shape with the Digitrax items to control the points. And there you can see the favourite old viaduct board, and underneath the 9-lane fiddle yard. As we move around to the northern wall and the top level area, which we will talk about shortly, we become the station area. And then moving on to the western wall, and then finally where this pop ply board is at the moment, that's where eventually the helix will be, the second helix, which will come out and form a peninsula. Well, here's the new board in place, and it has 9 tracks on it, but this one actually contains 12 points, so the underside of it is somewhat complex, let's say. But it really was a struggle to wire up and did take some time. And a couple of weeks ago when I was doing it, I hit a fundamental snag. So here's a little clip that I shot a couple of weeks ago just to show you what went wrong. As you can probably tell by my dreadful attire, and I haven't cleaned the place up whatsoever, today isn't a filming day. Today's a build day, and I'm progressing with this main board for the fiddle yard. But something happened which I thought is worth sharing, so I'll whip the camera out and share it with you. This board is the main board where all the points converge on the centre of the fiddle yard. It's wired up into 2 power districts. There's this district here, which goes out into that fan, which is in the yellow district, and this one here, which is in the green district, and that goes out that way. And as you can see, straight down the middle, the 2 don't join. With my layout on the top level, I always wire it black to the back. That's in red and black, so the black cables are on the rear rails and the red's on the front. But when you go through a helix, those reverse. So on this board here, it's red to the rear rather than black to the back. This is the way I kind of look at it. So if I just whip this board over and show you what's going on underneath. Now, as you can see, it's the usual pickle of wiring, I suppose, part of my obsession. And these cables that are going over the top are the ones that go to switch the points and for block detection. Straightforward, there's just 12 tortoise point motors and some wiring. And I mentioned about the power district. Well, this is the green terminal block for the green district, and this is for the yellow. And what I was doing, I was just testing to make sure that these were okay. Now, regarding these terminal blocks, I acquired them from Amazon, and there is a link in the Show More tab down below to this video. And I buy them. They are 12 terminals, and you get and you use them as a bus, as it were. And this is a bridging piece, so that if you put a power feed in here, you can take it all off there. A bit like tag strips, but without all the soldering. And you also get a black bridge piece as well, so you can, it's just eye candy really, but you can disseminate then your reds from your blacks or whatever. I've actually used in one of these an earth block, and I just put some earth cable across the front so I know exactly what's going on. But because of these bridging pieces, they are brilliant. Now, for these ones, I didn't actually need the 12 terminals, I only needed 6. So what I did was I got a red and a black. I cut them in half, turned them around so that the ends were insulated, and I fitted them in here. And as you can see, all the red cables come to one side and all the blacks go to the other. And the reason yellow is upside down is because when I crawl underneath this board, it'll actually be the right way up, because this is the front. Now, a friend of mine, Nick, made me up a small continuity tester, which is basically a small box with a battery in it, two little leads and a buzzer. Now, when I connect these together, it's no surprise that the buzzer goes off. So what I was doing was I was testing to make sure there is no continuity between any of these terminals whatsoever, because there's no way that the black should be connected, or the reds or whatever. So those two aren't connected to there or to there or to there, and that one isn't connected to there or to there. However, when I put this one on here and this one on here, clearly I've made an error somewhere so that there is a short between the positive and the negative section on this terminal block within the yellow area. Another advantage in labelling everything up. So it's either a problem on the track or a problem within one of these tortoise point motors. So the first thing I looked at was, could it possibly be the track? So I lowered the board back down. So running an eye over all the points, you can see where it's red to the rear, until of course you get to this little darling here, because this one is actually red to the front. And as smug as I think I am with my wiring, it was just a schoolboy error. But because of those junction boxes and the ability to pop a couple of probes on to see if you've got continuity, i.e. a short circuit, it's much easier to fault find. So what do I need to do? Now, just flipping the board back over again, and then you can see that the problem area is this point here, which is point 48, and the feeder there, because I obviously mark these things up with an obsession by wiring, is these two cables are the wrong way around. So rather than go back to the terminal blocks and change them around, I couldn't possibly have a red cable going into a black terminal. So I sort of just put a little terminal block in here and switch them around the other way and see if it clears the snag. And here we are now. I've installed a little bit of chocolate block, and obviously there's the motor, there's a P48, and the black and red turn into the red and black, and off they go back to those main junction boxes. I'm not too sure I could handle a red wire going into the black side of the junction boxes. That's just a step too far for me, I'm afraid. Can't handle that. So hopefully now when we put the tester back on, all should be well. So we're back here with the tester, just make sure it works. Yes, it does. And so now when I connect these together, nothing. So we know that by reversing those two wires we switched it. But the point is, these are nifty little terminal blocks, not only because it keeps your wiring in a sort of a chaseable manner and you can figure out what's going on, but for testing, brilliant. So there we go. I just need to wire in all these components now to these cables and make some kind of a flapper board, and we'll be there. So there we go, terminal blocks. Check it out in the Show More tab. So a couple of days later then, I'd constructed the flap down board and all seemed well, all straightforward, really nicely labelled up, until of course I popped it in situ to find that the two uprights from the main board actually blocked access to two of those components. So those uprights would need to be moved around. And then obviously all I had to do was then install the tracks to join all these boards together. And there's the board in situ, and I've moved the two uprights and put these ones in and bolted them through into what we know as board 5, and then this board here just flicks back up the way and is held in by magnetic catches, and then I'm free to satisfy my really right box fetish of being able to store stuff underneath. I've also installed an extension lead which works through my remote switches, so I can turn off all the extension leads within the railway room by the throw of a switch, which will then turn off all these components that go into running the railway. Oh, you're back. Now I do understand that I'm in a very fortunate position that occasionally people send me stuff. And a couple of weeks ago I did a video on signal boxes, and if you recall, I visited the Totnes signal box, or the converted signal box, which is now a very nice cafe. If you haven't seen that video, there should be a link up here. And I was caught eating a Bakewell tart. And then a couple of days ago, while I was out visiting my next door neighbour, I missed the postman because I found the red ticket, the card saying you're out, you'll have to drive 5 miles to Shepton Mallet to pick it up. So I drove up there the next day, showed them the voucher, and they gave me this little box. And what's inside the box? Well, astonishingly, it's a Bakewell tart from the Bakewell tart shop. And there it is in all its finery, and I'm about to have a slice, and I'm sure it's going to taste gorgeous. There was a note in there, and it just said, "Learn and enjoy. Regards." I contacted the Bakewell tart shop, and they told me that it was ordered by a gentleman by the name of Keith Wynn. Keith, you shouldn't have. Think of the calories, fella. I'm extremely appreciative. I'm going to have a bite of this shortly, and then when my wife gets back, we'll share some if there's any left. Keith, thank you very much indeed. You're a star, but a very naughty one. Now I thought it's time to talk about station design and what I'm going to do along this north wall. The trouble is, in the UK, you can't really have realistic length stations because, I mean, in the old days, when I say the old days, the 60s and 70s, we had 13 coach trains running around, and nowadays we have obviously the 125s, and they were sort of 9 coaches of Mark III stock. And now we have double-headed 800s running around, and these are huge trains, but how do we model a station to sort of fit them? Now here we see Brush Falcon D1200 at the front of 8 coaches. Excuse the coaching stock, it's not supposed to be prototypical, it's just coaches in a long line. Now, these coaches are actually, with the loco, 8 foot long, which is 244 centimetres. This room is 15 feet wide, and as you can see, it takes up half the room. So do we really need 8-foot trains? Well, I think to make your railway interesting, they are a great asset. So what I decided to do is my scenic trains, that's trains that will run straight through the layout without stopping in these 2 outer tracks, will be 8 foot long. Now they could be 8 coach trains such as this one here, or a freight train, you know, that's kind of 8 foot long. And the stopping trains, however, would not be 8 coaches, but they would be 6 coaches, which makes it, you know, gets it down to around about 6 foot long. And I think that way, when we build a station here with platforms on either side, it just doesn't end up being too long and too boring. So we can build some features in. It doesn't just go on forever. It becomes a more interesting station. And of course, then when we come down to this area down the end, we can do something else besides run platforms on forever. One thing I did learn down with David Townend's team at McKinley was this. It seems quite obvious really. He uses a piece of rope to mark out the length of his trains, and the whole length of this rope is an 8-coach train, whereas where you can see this little bit of red here, that is the length of a 6-coach train, which is very useful when you're working out your fiddle yard dimensions and also block detection, because rather than take a ruler and you're trying to get it around curves underneath boards or whatever, banging your head as I usually do, you can just take this piece of rope down there, figure it out. Yep, okay, so that's a kind of 6 foot, so I need a 6'6" or a 7-foot block in which to store that train, and which fiddle yard tracks need to be longer or shorter, which trains, you know, you might have short freight trains or long tanker trains and that sort of thing. So having a piece of rope measured out with distances, i.e. that's your 8 foot and that's your 6 foot, is a good way of doing things, and I thank David and his team because they are a mine of information down there. Now I should just bring up the 125 into this station area and see how that fits in. And as you can see, it's quite a substantial train. But what you probably don't realise is I've actually taken one of the second class coaches out. Now as you can see, the 125 with a missing coach is actually about 3 inches shorter, or 8 centimetres shorter than a standard 8 coach train. So that's probably what I shall run around the layout when I move on to later trains. I do want to bring my reverse livery Pullman out of the Fiddle yard, so I'm going to have to move this class 50 and bring her into the station as well, so it's going to get a bit crowded. And then by bringing this one into the station area, we can make a final decision on what real length we're after. So now at last we can have a decent lineup of trains and do an actual length comparison. And now we can see that the reverse livery Pullman is actually the same length as an older train that's pulling 5 Mark 1, Mark 2 type coaches. So to help me clear the decks, I've brought the class 50 and the 125 down into the Fiddle yard for the first time actually. Christened in anger then. Now back up in the station area, we've got the reverse livery Pullman and Falcon with 6 coaches. And then looking at the reverse livery Pullman, you can see that it's round about 10 inches shorter than the other train, which is about the same length as a Mark 1 or Mark 2 coach. So the Pullman is the same length as a loco with 5 coaches. So all we need to do really is to decide, do we go for a 5 coach station or a 6 coach station? And then hopefully during the planning phase, when you were laying track, of course, it's always best when you consider the complications of block detection, because here I've installed two insulated rail joiners, so when these trains come into the final block and draw current from this piece of track, the train should stop completely. And again here, if we were going to have a passing freight, as soon as it crosses its fish plate, it would stop and allow the passenger train to go straight through. So it's a case of planning your insulated fish plates and your stop areas for your trains, from the very beginning. And then similarly, of course, across here, I'm going to need a set of signals. And exactly the same at the other end for these two tracks. Now let's get this Pullman out of the way and bring up something new. Now, I'm not really much of a steam nut. I was born in 1958 and I have no recollection of steam running on Britain's main lines. I don't remember it. It's all a blank, to be perfectly honest. But in 1971, King George V returned to main line duties. It was the first steam loco that was allowed back on the British railway lines. So I thought, as this is a 1968-74 kind of layout, with the exception of an HST, I would purchase this. And I did mention it in a previous video. Unfortunately, one of the subscribers turned around and said, well, actually, I've got one. Would you like to buy it? And I did. So there we go. It's not got sound fitted yet, but we'll work on that. And it's got Pullman coaches, just as the real thing did. But I believe when it came back into service, they had green Pullman cars named after the wives of the guys that restored King George V. Anyway, she'll run with these set of Pullman cars and be a welcome addition to Chadwick. I think once she gets sound fitted, it'll be a marvellous addition. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video on ballasting, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning that I think I made a couple of mistakes, and hopefully you won't do the same. I used Woodland Scenic's fine grey blend for the ballast, and whilst it's in and looking okay, it's very much kind of samey. It all looks the same and it's a bit bland. I will improve that with obviously the greenery and a bit of airbrushing to put a bit of muck on the sleepers and the ballast and so on, so it will change. But if I had done one side in the grey blend and perhaps one in the grey or light grey or medium grey, whatever, to give it two tones, I think it would have looked a little bit better. Also, in this area here, I use a piece of orange 702 cable to replicate protective tubing that's used to protect point motor cables, as it were, that get damaged by ballast tamping machines. But this came in the mid to late 80s, 86, 87, the earliest I can find it, and I thank Laura for pointing it out to me that this is out of my era, as it were, because this layout, I'm sure as you're aware, is based sort of 68, 74-ish. So the orange tubing was not around when this layout is sort of aged, as it were. So this has to come out or painted black, but it's noteworthy perhaps to you that those things came in from 86, and I believe today they're no longer used. They actually are being done away with. Furthermore, I also made well, it wasn't an error, but there's another way of ballasting of gluing the ballast into points, and that is to put the point blades in the centre before you glue. Therefore, they can't glue hard against one of the rails. It's only the switch blades that could sort of go solid. In either case, it hasn't happened to me, but it might be a worthwhile option by by putting your switch blades in the central position prior to applying any glue in those somewhat delicate areas. Of course, trying to look forward and getting trains moving, because I really need to test that helix properly. And the only way I can test the helix properly is by having trains running at speed up and down. And of course, as you've seen on the board underneath, it comes to a sudden stop. So how can we test it properly and getting trains moving without completing the next helix? Well, Lee, the track guru that does numerous favours for me with track planning, has suggested that we have a loop on top here and a loop underneath, so that trains can just simply come up the up line, round the loop and straight back down the down line, so we can test all of the upper level. And then of course all we need to do is do exactly the same on the lower level. And this is called a shoe fly, apparently, a term I picked up at McKinley, and that makes perfect sense really, because that way I can develop the layout. Once that helix is tested, I can then move on to the branch line station above it whilst playing trains in the background, and of course develop the station area which we spoke about earlier. So these are the kind of things I'm thinking of doing from now on. So video wise, there'll be a bit of building, a bit of landscaping, but in the background there's the heavy track work to be done both underneath and of course this little shoe fly area on top. Now you've seen these pop ply boards, so let me show you with the use of the program AnyRail what I'm doing with those. Well, those two pop ply boards are these two here in this area, and if I zoom in a little, you can see that this one is 60 inches by 28 and this one is 26 by 28 across here. Now you've seen this board go in recently. This is board 5. Board 6, 7 and 8 are these. Now 7 and 8 are those two, the two pop ply ones I've shown you. But if I bolt them together and build this now, then I've got no awkward curves to build into the track work when I'm underneath the board. So if I bolt these two together, fit the legs, fit all the track work on top, including these points, and then fit them underneath the layout in situ, that leaves me then with this 21-inch gap, and this is a much more easy board to build, slot in, fit this point, and then obviously just drop these tracks across whilst working underneath the main boards. If I didn't do that and I made this board first then this one, to construct this with all these curved tracks would be an absolute nightmare. If I now zoom out and show you how it might work with the shoe fly affair. So trains would come along this network of points through here and then come down these tracks around a shoe fly loop here, back up the outside track and then up the existing helix and onto the main tracks up top. Up top, of course, it would do a similar loop around the station, round another shoe fly, then come down and then back down the helix, arriving on this track here. And then I've got this fan of sidings there where I can stow it. So I can't fit any trains here because these tracks wouldn't actually go anywhere. It would just be the small shoe fly. But that's my intentions on how it will work. I will just show you the complexity of the whole layout now, because in this area here, if I can zoom in a moment, it's worth explaining that on top of Helix 2 there is a DMU, a loco shed, a TMD. Here there is a fuel area, and here there is potentially a raised section with a Freightliner area. Hence this is a massive build and will take a substantial amount of time. Hence I want to run trains prior to the commencement of this build, and having proven that this helix design works perfectly. And now moving on to another exciting purchase. I've had a Polaroid Cube track cam, let's call it, for quite a few years, and sadly this one is packed up. I can't get it repaired, they don't make them anymore, so we move on. But I put the feelers out on YouTube, and a couple of guys came back with me to me recommending that I would buy a Hawkeye Q6 mini camera. It's actually designed for a drone. Now, looking at it, all I use is a little conflat wagon with some blue tack, and I stick it onto the front of the wagon, but I point it down slightly. It's charged up on a USB stick, a USB port, and it has a micro SD card inside. And if I pop it on the tracks, and then if I turn it on, you'll be able to see that the image, if it's running now, let's bear with me. The image that we're recording now, you can see the lights flicker. And that's because this thing, like most of these track cameras, are designed to shoot at 30 frames per second. Whereas here in the UK, we're a 25 frames per second country, I'm afraid. So you get flickering. But if I control one of my lights and turn that LED off, you'll notice that the flickering stops, because the main lights in the studio here, I use sort of more professional lights, let's say, and they don't give that flickering image that you'll get off the cheap B&Q ones that I generally use. It's got a microphone in it, and if I send it on its way, you can see the little red lights flashing. So I'll send it down around the layout and then into the fiddle yard. So because it's darker in there, you'll get a better feel for its usefulness, and you can make a decision whether it's something that you feel you ought to invest in. So this is the microphone in the Hawkeye Q6, and I should turn the Hymex sound on and send her on the way, but this Hymex sound is somewhat on the loud side. So there we are, it's a cracking little camera really, I think so. I'm not suggesting you buy one, you know, you pay your money and take your chance. Hawkeye Firefly Q6. I'd leave you a link on Amazon, but they're out of stock, but they are on eBay, and I think they're about £45 a pop. But perhaps you might agree, I think it's a good little kit, and we'll see how it lasts. I of course need to thank people, and that's not only the suppliers of rather nice Bakewell tarts, but also in all seriousness to the people who support the channel, people who donate by PayPal, and of course the patrons. And of course, if you'd like to subscribe, there's a button. Subscription is free, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, there should be a video here and here. Take care. Bye bye.